people just flocked to Bitcoin because there was really no other option. And so I think the same is going to be true again for social media apps. When people just get censored, people, they lose their livelihood because their business is essentially shut down by these corporations. They will have to learn. They will have to learn how to use these decentralized applications. And so I think adoption comes out of desperation. That's how I see the future going.
Now, one of the inherent things that I wondered about these other social networks, particularly the alt ones, was why not have native wallets? Why not have the ability to earn? I think some of these alternative social networks are still working with these constructs of advertising. I think the Twitter thing, I think it's a bit of a, I think the WEF thing is really interesting of people saying she's a WEF person. The truth is she ran advertising for NBC, and Twitter is an ad business, and they're burning money like crazy, and they need more advertisers, so it's bring the queen of advertising to run the business. That to me is really the play. But why do you think that all these businesses continue to be ad businesses and can't move away from the direct support platform for creators?
I think honestly it's because it's what people know. Most of these companies are people who have been in business for decades, and for the past century at least, the advertising model has been the way you monetize things, whether you're running a TV channel, it's the way Google, Facebook, YouTube, all of these platforms, whether online or offline, advertising is just, it's the go-to. It's tried, it's tested. You're always going to be having people out there who want to get their products out and their services out in front of other people. So I think it's seen as a sort of a low-risk, safe option. And I think that once someone has been in business for many decades or running these type of platforms for many decades, they have a vested interest. Of course, they have other entities. They have the advertisers and partners and their shareholders and all these other entities.
The business model is entrenched.
Yes, and so are the relationships. So is this network. So for them to go out on a limb and take a completely different risk and try a new way of monetization that might annoy some of their shareholders, especially if they're a public company, it's a lot to ask for. But again, I think this creates the opportunity for young and quick-moving entrepreneurs and investors and business owners to create something, to try new stuff.
Right.
To try new stuff. If you're a giant corporation worth billions of dollars, it's hard to take certain types of risks. I think this is also why they're supporting a lot of these woke agendas and whatnot, right? Not because they really believe in it, but it's just, it's safe. It's safe. It's easier to not, step on any toes or annoy anybody. But for people like us, we can go out and cause trouble because we're harder to cancel. So I think that, it creates that opportunity with what you're doing with Zion and Nostr, whatever else is out there already and is going to come. They can move a lot more quickly. They can test things out, try them. And again, we're going to find out what that new model is in the long term. I don't think it's clear at this stage what exactly comes after advertising, right? If you're going to have this type of platform with no advertising, what exactly is the revenue model? Where exactly is the money coming from? I don't think that answer is clear yet, but it will be.
Yeah, I definitely think the business model is entrenched, and it's very difficult to change and try something new, especially when, if it's working, why change it, I guess, to some extent. But I also think that people don't really want to pay, Like you can be scrolling through Twitter and you might see something which entertains you, but doesn't mean you want to pay for it, You want to see the drama, you want to see what's going on, but you don't necessarily want to give your money away. People just don't, and I understand, people are paying $8 a month for Twitter, but that's because you're giving it to a company, so you feel better about yourself rather than endorsing somebody who you don't really like, but you like to see the drama and the entertainment online. I think it's as simple as that. People just don't really want to give their money away to people that they're not completely invested in. I think in order to give an individual money, you need to be some kind of super fan, right? And you're not a super fan for everyone. There's only probably a couple people that you absolutely love and you want to give the money, and that's it. So I think people want to participate, but they don't want to pay.
Do you think there's a future in microtransactions for these social networks? It seems like, look, we have a $4 billion a year business called OnlyFans, right? And they're doing $800 million in free cash flow, effectively on microtransactions and small subscriptions. You can say that it's an adult business, but it's a direct support platform, nonetheless making a lot of cash. So is there a future for microtransactions for creators?
Well, just on the point of OnlyFans, you have to understand what it is.
Totally.
Predominantly,
totally.
it's men looking at young women in a provocative manner, right?
App. I get it.
No. But what I'm saying is, like, they are super fans. They are addicted. They are super fans. Their entire biology is pushing them to look in a certain way. It's not the same.
Yes. For that market,
right.
Yes. So there is, but what about for other types of creators? Is there an opportunity for microtransactions?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I think it's a natural evolution of a decentralized platform.
Right.
You know, and it would be great to tip if you like something. Sure, tip a few satoshis. I don't know how well that's going to do, because maybe I'm cynical, but I really stand by the idea that, like, people just don't want to give money unless you're a super fan, which is a man watching a young woman on OnlyFans. That's a super fan.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. It's a category for sure. And I just wonder if that type of content eventually transcends. Zuby, what's your perspective on microtransactions?
Well, firstly, I think that male thirst drives a lot of innovation.
Yeah.
And it has done all through human history.
It built video, it built VHS, it built...
So, yeah, it might start with prawn and only simps. But over time, I think things have to be normalized sometimes as well. So I think, yes, at the moment, because social media has been quote unquote free, it's not really free, right? We're the products that they're selling to advertisers. But I think that for the past 15 years, people have gotten used to this idea of all these platforms being free, right? It's just free, and that's the way people think. And to try to change human behavior for individuals or at scale, it's always difficult. So I think that there could be a future where people are just totally used to microtransactions. I mean, you see little pockets of this. You brought up like the OnlyFans model, but even if you look at something like YouTube communities or Twitch communities with super chats and the donations, like in the streaming world,
it works.
It's streaming world. It's very normal, and everyone understands. Yeah, if you like a creator, you just throw them $5. You want to ask a question, cool, send them a $10, $20 super chat,
right.
And it works. Not everyone is going to do it, but enough people, and to someone who's outside of it, it might be weird. They're looking at that like, why did you just give $100 to this person playing video games, like, to support them, But to people who are in that economy, it's very normal to them.
Yeah.
And I can see that becoming a little bit more widespread, especially if it's microtransactions. We're not just talking, giving $5, $10, $100, $500, but, a couple Satoshis here, some Satoshis there. So again, like everything I keep saying, I think it takes time.
I think as well, when you are within that creator economy, different platforms often have different tokens. So I guess to some extent, you don't feel like you're giving money when you're giving away like a token, which creators can then cash out. TikTok is a great example of this. On TikTok, you can buy different tokens and fun emojis and whatever it is, and then you can just send it to a creator. And so you have like 13-year-olds just like throwing away $100 because they don't really understand what they're doing, because it's just an emoji, I can just throw it away. But then the creator has the ability to cash out. So I guess within certain economies, if the idea of money is sort of separated from what they're giving away, perhaps, yeah, that can definitely be a way forward.
So Twitter is, I think, both of your largest platforms. I have a inkling. My spidey senses are tingling that, yes, woo. My spidey senses are tingling in the sense that Elon will build a native digital wallet on Twitter very soon. Obviously, the hope of probably everyone at this conference is that it would be Lightning enabled. They have Lightning tips on certain profiles. He's a super fan of you. He follows you. He's a subscriber of you. Would you recommend to Elon to say, hey, you should probably put Bitcoin Lightning on a native wallet on Twitter?
I'll send him a DM later today.
There we go. I think you guys should clip that and share that out. That would probably be a real good thing to get. But really, I mean, do you think that enabling Lightning, for example, on Twitter would be effective for tweets? Like, I had an instinct 3 years ago when we built Zion, was that why shouldn't every piece of content ever posted, a reply, a post, have the opportunity for a payment? You don't have to do it, but like, it enables it.
Yeah,
what do you think about Twitter enabling that feature?
I think it would be a massive step forward. And I think something that I know Elon understands, and I've actually chatted with him about this online, is that recognizing, look, whatever the platform is, people are there because of the people who create the content, right? All the hundreds of millions of people who use Twitter, the billions of people who use YouTube, whatever, without the content creators, I don't really like that term, but it's what it is. True. Without those individuals, which are a small minority, none of this exists. There's no attention. It's all an attention economy, even if you're running off the old advertising model.
Right.
So you do have to, you should incentivize and compensate the people who are driving all the traffic to the platform and who are actually keeping people there. So I know right now they're experimenting with subscriptions, and they're going to try a lot of different ways of doing this. YouTube has the partner program. I think TikTok has something similar. Instagram you can earn through. So yeah, I think it would be a massive step forward for Elon to do that. And if they do it using Bitcoin rather than some Twitter token, that would be beautiful.
There we go. Leah, last words?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think why not try it? I think that creators should be compensated. I don't see the reason why not. I'm just really skeptical as to whether people are really going to pay, but we'll see.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Zuby.
Thanks, man.
Welcome back. I'm Pete Rizzo, editor of Bitcoin Magazine. We're here again at the Bitcoin Magazine live desk presented by Marathon. Once again, joined by special guests Mark Moss, Isaiah Jackson, Q, Kahimi. The next panel we're going to see on the main stage, the Indonesian Bitcoin mining campaign. We're going to hear from Ridwan Kamil, governor of West Java, Indonesia. Guys, want to talk about the rise of Bitcoin mining in the global south? What are we seeing? Mark.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing development. And the reason why is because the world has sort of been shaped by the countries that have natural resources and commodities. So if you have gold, if you had oil, you did really well. If you didn't, well, unfortunately, you didn't have much production into the global GDP. And so what we're seeing is sort of a remake-up, a redrawing of these lines globally. And so nations who have no exports, no natural goods, maybe bananas or coconuts, all of a sudden find themselves sitting on lots of natural resources or excess energy in this case. And so now with things like Starlink, so they can access the internet, and these abundant cheap energy sources that they have, now they're able to tap into a new resource, which is Bitcoin mining. And so they can turn this stranded energy, if you will, these resources that are not really able to get to the market, they can now turn that into money, which could really change the makeup of the world, bring abundance back to these nations, and really help bring global poverty up on a level we've never seen before.
Of course, we've seen this in El Salvador, we've seen this in Africa, and most recently Bhutan. Zay, interested in your take on the rise of mining in these nations?
Oh yeah, so mining, also known as, I would say, the digital treasure hunt, is something that these nations actually can use to increase their value as a country. And even here in the States, smaller states, I should say, can actually have an industry with Bitcoin mining. And unfortunately, we do have some people that are pushing that Bitcoin is bad for the environment or that it's not clean energy or whatever. And I just want to say to that, and I want to look in the camera and say it, please do not fall for the climate change psyop, and they're using Bitcoin as a scapegoat. That is not what's happening. Do not take your money out and give it to these politicians who are trying to push their own agenda and using Bitcoin as a scapegoat. And I think that Bitcoin does way more good than it does harm at all.
So potentially Bitcoin mining, maybe in Indonesia. We don't know the announcement. Q, what are your thoughts?
I want to talk first to those who actually have fallen for this psyop, who are the bleeding heart environmentalists. We have Shell Gas here as Shell as one of the sponsors at this year's conference, and I want to quickly cite Dan Batten, who wrote a series of articles for Bitcoin Magazine, essentially highlighting, as someone who, Dan Batten was a bleeding heart environmentalist, donated to Greenpeace. He has done the work and done the research to show and find that during the process of mining from natural gas, they are flaring methane gas, and that attributes to 1.7% of all of the methane gas that's going into our greenhouse gases, or whatever the hell these environmentalists say. But some very, very smart Bitcoin miners, smarter than me, smarter than most of us on this panel, have figured out ways to harness that methane gas and use it to power and mine Bitcoiners, and in turn release less methane gas into the environment. And actually, Dan Batten has proven that Bitcoin mining is actually better for the environment than the current systems that we have in place. So to Zay's point, don't believe these narratives that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. In fact, environmentalists and scientists have done the work to show you that Bitcoin mining is good for the environment.
A chance to change minds. Are U.S. politicians taking a look at what's happening in these other countries? Final take, Mark.
They certainly are. I mean, we can see what the U.S. is doing specifically with its sights set on El Salvador. And so they have specifically given warnings to El Salvador, hey, watch it, be careful, don't go against the financial monopoly that we have. And so, unfortunately, someone like Alex Gladstein, who has really highlighted how the financial system really oppresses or represses some of these nations. And so, unfortunately, I hate to think of my own country like that, but yes, the United States is looking at this, and I don't think they're super happy about this redrawing of the lines.
Well, stay with us. We'll be here at Bitcoin Magazine Live talking more and breaking down the announcements. You're about to go to the main stage and hear from Ridwan Kamil, governor of West Java, Indonesia. An announcement. We'll see.
Hello again. That last panel was a spicy one. So it's really interesting to see the nation-state level game theory of Bitcoin play out in real time, right? Like in our lifetimes. You've got the Kingdom of Bhutan, who was apparently just quietly mining Bitcoin for years. Of course, you have El Salvador, who adopted Bitcoin as legal tender and is also going to be issuing volcano bonds. But it's going to be interesting to see what other countries begin to jump on this Bitcoin bandwagon.
Come to think of it, Indonesia has a lot of volcanoes, and I wonder, what could they do with all that raw power?
I wonder indeed. Coming up next, we have the Indonesia Bitcoin mining campaign with Ridwan Kamil, the governor of West Java. This is a population of 50 million people. And of course, Samson Moe, the CEO of Gen 3.
Please give them a very, very warm welcome.
Let's see. Hello, good morning, Miami.
Good morning, everybody.
Not a bad turnout for a bear market. So let's warm things up a bit before we get started. Let's have some fun. So I'm going to say Bitcoin. You guys say nation-state adoption. Ready? Bitcoin. Nation-state adoption. All right, let's do one more. I'll say Indonesia. You guys say needs Bitcoin. Ready? Indonesia. Needs Bitcoin. Do you believe them?
I believe them.
All right, let's start.
100%.
All right. So, Governor Kamil, let's first start with the question everyone wants to know. How did you first hear about Bitcoin, and what got you interested in Bitcoin?
Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Ridwan Kamil. I'm currently a leader for 50 million people in Indonesia. 5 to 6 years ago, I learned about Bitcoin. It's part what I call digital disruption. It's a form of digital currency that can be used as a form of payment outside the control of individual, institution, and I think it's very democratic. Yeah, but we need to learn more, because as a leader, I need to understand 100%, because I'm a decision maker. Once the leader understands, I can translate it into policies that benefit public interest. Yeah, because there are 3 types of leader when responding to digital disruption. Number 1, leader that doesn't understand or acknowledge the digital disruption. Second one, understand the digital disruption but does nothing. I'm the third one, understand the digital disruption, that I adjust, adapt the disruption to a public policy. For example, I fight corruption using artificial intelligence. I'm using blockchain technology for my coffee business export. So if you drink coffee in Starbucks, you can learn and tracing back your coffee back to the plantation owner, for example. I'm using IoT to feed the fish, to feed the chicken. So this digital disruption in the hands of leader like me will benefit the future public interest. So that's how I learned that Bitcoin also is the future. Today is not yet there as a form of transaction in daily basis, but it's getting there to find the balance. So I'm here also to learn from you all what is the future for us.
All right. So maybe you can tell the audience, in case they don't know, what is your job like being a governor? It's one of the most populous regions. And what's your proudest achievement to date?
My biggest achievement, I have 20.2 million followers in my Instagram account.
And you're going to teach them about Bitcoin.
You can add at Ridwan Kamil. I'm responsible to 50 million lives of my people. I used to be an architect, a practicing architect. I graduated from UC Berkeley years ago. I was a city mayor of Bandung, 2.5 million, and now a governor of 50 million. And next year is national election. I'm top 4 for presidential candidate like Mr. Kennedy, so who knows? Finger crossed. So that's basically my background, yeah.
Okay. So Indonesia is an energy-rich country, which could be a major player in the Bitcoin mining space. You have the second most geothermal potential in the world, and there are more than 800 rivers with hydropower. Now, as Bitcoin allows for the transformation of money into energy, or energy into money, Bitcoin could be very transformative for Indonesia, especially for mining Bitcoin. What are your thoughts there?
Before I answer to this very important question, I would like to give the audience the optimistic statistic, okay? Indonesia, almost 300 million people. Currently number 16 in G20 groups, okay? Our economy is always above 5% per year. So if we keep our economy 5% the next 20 years, my country, Indonesia, could be the number 4 biggest economy in the world. After China, India, and US, it will be Indonesia. We are now number 7 of Bitcoin adoption in the world. So you can imagine, yeah, from 200 countries, Bitcoin adoption, Indonesia number 7. And the fastest growing investor of Bitcoins. We have like 7 million investor for mutual fund, 8 million investor for stocks, and 12 million for crypto investor. Out of 12 million, 70% are Bitcoin investors. So, and every year, we grow 500,000 new investors. So you see, I'm coming from a country of the 7 biggest Bitcoin adoption. So you need more leaders, political leaders like me to understand, and you know, in the future we could be the heaven for a Bitcoin investor. And this is the best part. We have the biggest reserve of renewable energy in the world. If you combine our solar, flowing waters, combining with wind and geothermal, because Indonesia has the biggest active volcano in the world, yeah, we will produce 400 gigawatts of power. 300 million of our population is only consuming half. So in the future, we have extra 200 gigawatts of power of renewable energy. And that's where the Bitcoin minings come to play. That's why I would like to come here to invite you to build our infrastructure of renewable energy in any form, because it's benefiting the jobs to my people. Imagining you bring these miners to any villages that have flowing water, hot solar, for example. and brings also the advancement of technology, educating my people about the future of this Bitcoin. Yeah. So I think 200 gigawatts potential renewable energy is up for grabs. So hopefully, because government money is not enough. Yeah. As a governor, I have a budget only 17% to finance everything happening in my region. So I need the private sector. I need people who understand this concept of better world without too much carbon. Yeah, because Indonesia committed 2050 to be net zero. Current speed of going net zero is too slow because relying too much on government money in intervention. But if Bitcoin miners come with infrastructure of renewable energy projects, we could speed more and creating less carbon lifestyle or net zero society in the near future.
So there's a big opportunity. Let's let them give you some applause.
Thank you.
So basically what you're saying is you see a big opportunity for Indonesia because you have China that's cracked down on Bitcoin mining, and in the US, they're pushing forward potential legislation like a 30% tax. But you're open to bringing in Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining to Indonesia. Is that right?
Yes, I think everybody's scared about disruption, basically. If you don't have knowledge how to respond to disruption, usually you have very protective attitude against disruption. I'm very open-minded leaders. I'm a very pro-business leader. But again, I need to balance between these digital revolutions, also the public interest that I have to protect, right? For example, Bitcoin is a solution, in my opinion, to unbankable part of my society. 40% of my people are unbankable. So traditional financial institution is not a solution. So I think this is something I would like to share, and having open-minded mindset. Then after this, I learn from all of you. When I return to my country, I make a series of decisions and creating a balanced situation for our future economy and financial freedom also. And so many new investors of Bitcoin, including one of the investors are here, which is my wife. Where is my wife? Somewhere. It's very supportive of Bitcoin.
So let's talk a bit about how to actually get Bitcoin companies, Bitcoin mining companies to go to Indonesia. There's recently an omnibus law that was passed that would allow for energy projects above 1 megawatt to be 100% funded by foreign investors. So that could be a big draw for people to go to Indonesia. What would you do in addition to that, or do you want to comment on that, on its ability to attract companies to Indonesia? Or are there additional laws that you see that could benefit companies to go there?
Yeah, as a leader, I'm also a lawmaker. Yeah, we recently just passed what we call omnibus law. It's a super law bypassing like maybe 200 existing redundant law. Yeah, this omnibus law also gives opportunities for you to invest to build at least 1 megawatts or 10 megawatts of renewable energy 100% funded by private sector. So I'm offering you, come to Indonesia, let's tap this biggest reserve of renewable energy dedicated to the mining business of Bitcoin, because also I think the way we work, Bitcoin mining is helping also to create an affordable price of energy, because you can take the excess power during the peak of the power supply, and during the downtime you can you can shut down during the peak time, and you can resume the activity during the downtime. So I think this is creating a very balance for creating affordable price of power. So hopefully, by this perspective, we will have this omnibus law creating a massive interest from all of you to come to Indonesia and creating much renewable power for your mining business. And I think in the current state, I will have the projects in the next couple of months from American company opening this renewable power for mining business. Because I think Bitcoin mining is borderless. Yeah, you can do it anywhere in the world to your business. But also, Samson, I'm here as a country leader. I want you to teach me or give me a lesson. What did you do in El Salvador? I heard you have government bonds using Bitcoin. So what's the update and what lesson learned that I can learn from your initiative?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to take into account the game theory. So as Indonesia is interested to attract Bitcoin mining and the Bitcoin industry, there is a rush, right? The first ones that adopt Bitcoin in a meaningful way will be the countries that have a big advantage. And this advantage could help to propel you into the top 4 producing countries in the world. But the Bitcoin bonds, I think it's an interesting design. So you're an architect. I'm also an architect of the Bitcoin bonds. But it's basically a financial instrument that takes half of the funds raised. So for example, $1 billion bond, you'll take half of it to buy Bitcoin, half of it to go into a revenue-generating activity to cover the coupon on the bond. And in the case of El Salvador, they have volcano bonds, and that is Bitcoin mining with geothermal energy. So the bond can finance a lot of the build-out of new energy infrastructure, which is something that you're interested in, except that you have a lot of other types of energy. So there have been talks with other governments, Ecuador and Costa Rica, about creating hydro bonds, which would be tapping into hydropower. And that's something that you could do as well. So Indonesia could have a volcano bond, hydro bonds, and other bonds too. But I think it's an interesting way to leverage Bitcoin's price appreciation. So Bitcoin appreciates roughly 60% a year median. And by 2023, that's very conservative too. By 2023, Bitcoin should be about 2.9 or 3 million. So that's a 10-year period, and the bonds would be a 10-year bond structure, and that would get you to through 2 halving events. So I think it's interesting, and if you're interested, we can chat more, and I'm happy to design one for Indonesia.
Yeah, I think anything to speed up the development of my country, I would be very interested. Because as I said, if you rely 100% to government intervention, government money will never enough. So we need to create some sort of other form of financial setup to build the infrastructure. So I think this government bond of Bitcoin is very, very interesting. I would like to learn. You know, West Java, my province, is having the biggest solar project in ASEAN. Yeah, we build it on the water, floating on the water. We are doing it with Masdar, it's Abu Dhabi company, because solar projects is better 0 degrees, so floating on the water is the best. So if you come to my region, you will see lakes with full of solar farming. And we are coming from tropical country, so solar is very strong, right? So I think, again, 7 biggest Bitcoin adoption with full reserve of energy, renewable energy. And also we have a Bitcoin conference in October in Bali. So if you would like to see the island of Bali where Julia Roberts play for Eat, Pray and Love, come to Bali, let's discuss in more detail about our Bitcoin collaborations. Yeah.
So do you see Bitcoin being a booster for tourism? So many countries have their little Bitcoin enclaves. So you have Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador and Bitcoin Jungle in Costa Rica, and there's numerous ones. Do you think having some sort of Bitcoin place in Indonesia could be a benefit? And is tourism top of mind for you? Seems like it is.
Yes, I think I'm learning and adopting wherever I can make a good decision to my people. I think the best one in my imagination is the financial inclusivity. Yeah, imagine 50 million people. I still have a challenge of 40% unbankable. So this micro payment, because you know, without the third-party involvement, faster transactions, right? Lower fee, because you don't have to pay the third party. You can just install, connect to the Bitcoin ecosystem right away, and making a transfer easier, cross-border international transaction also faster. With the Lightning project, for example, it will help my 40% of my people. That's my interest as a leader also. So micro SME project might benefit from Bitcoin transaction, maybe experimental in one region for Bitcoin-friendly tourism, for example, is something I would like to learn. At the end, we have to benefit. But as a government, you have to understand that we still have in the transition mode. I remember during the arrival of Uber, yeah, the Uber projects business already happening on the street, but regulation like takes 4 years in my country to regulate, to have a fair trade of this online transportation. Yeah. So that's what's happening also with Bitcoins. It's already happening with our 12 million investors. So currently I have a good news. As we speak, we are now preparing for trading exchange of Bitcoin in Indonesia. So hopefully it will take place as soon as possible. And this is, we get the balance. Yeah. So combination of regulation, experimenting in tourism area, and benefiting this micro business of my people. This is something I would like to see in concrete implementation in the next coming 2 or 3 years time.
Okay, so you're interested in bringing people with Bitcoin tourism. That's great. So the interesting thing is, in Indonesia, Bitcoin payments are actually prohibited. And there is a parallel here. So there was a large Bitcoin crackdown over time in China, and it first started as a payments ban. So back in the day, I used to run an exchange, but you're first prohibited from payments, so you couldn't use Bitcoin as payments. And then came the shutdown of the exchanges, and then came crackdown on the mining industry. But you're welcoming mining, and I think exchanges can operate, but do you think there needs to be a shift in thinking about Bitcoin as a payment mechanism? Because it's difficult to bank the unbanked. Well, you can bank them, but if they can't pay with Bitcoin, it would be a problem.
I'm a type of leader that not always against the disruption. I'm the type of leader who try to understand what is the disruption and what can I do to use this disruption, as I said, to benefit my public. As I said before, I'm the first governor using AI to fight corruptions. I'm using the blockchain, the first one, to make my coffee export business a transparent and fair trade process. I'm using the IoT. Mobile phone is no longer a means of communication. In rural area, I'm using mobile phone as a means of production. You press the mobile phone, the food fish projected to the fish pond, for example. We catch the ocean fish using the satellite apps called Fish Finder. So again, it just needs a time, to be ready for Bitcoin as a form of payment. Currently, digital payment in Indonesia is everywhere. I'm paying everything with my e-wallet, but not yet to Bitcoin. But it takes time to be ready. Yeah. as long as, one, you have a strong regulatory framework. Second, you have a scheme for protection for any potential risk, for example, right? And the third, you still manage to have what we call a balance between government control and individual control to your own transaction. So I think hopefully in the next coming years, the payment using Bitcoin will be in place. Again, please come to Indonesia, 7th biggest Bitcoin adoption. Come to Bali in October, let's discuss more detail. And let's see more infrastructure of renewable energy. At the end of the day, we have a better world to live in, less carbon, better sustainable future, and digital democratic Bitcoin will be a new thing and a normal thing in Indonesia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have 30 seconds left. What are your thoughts, very briefly, on Bitcoin as a reserve asset for the country? Indonesia has gold. Does it make sense for Indonesia to have Bitcoin?
In the new generation, they now they buy gold, they buy stocks, yeah, and now they are buying Bitcoin as a reserve for individual. But for a country, it's a bit complicated. Country like us, we have gold reserve, yeah, and many form of reserve, but not yet the Bitcoin reserve. But I think, as I said, everything takes time. Disruption takes time to be understood. So hopefully, see you in Indonesia, a Bitcoin heaven in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Governor Ridwan Kamil. Let's go.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Pete Rizzo, editor at Bitcoin Magazine. We're here again at the Bitcoin Magazine live desk presented by Marathon. Quick apology to the viewers out there. Our live stream was abruptly cut on YouTube, ironically during a conversation about censorship on YouTube. We're fixing the problems, and of course live on Rumble. Joined now by a new round of special guests. To my left, Matthew Pines, Director of Security and Intelligence at Krebs Stamos. To his left, Jason Mayer, author of A Progressive's Case for Bitcoin. And last but not least, Dan, host of Blue Collar Bitcoin. We just heard from governor of Indonesia, who's open about Bitcoin, wants to court Bitcoin mining. We're about to hear on the main stage a fireside chat with Cynthia Lummis, senator from Wyoming. Want to talk about the war in Washington over Bitcoin. What's at stake in this conversation, Matt?
So, a lot's at stake. We've seen some progress and then 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. And I think Cynthia Lummis is a champion for Bitcoin in D.C., and she's focused on getting proper legislation across the line, and she's working in a bipartisan fashion. But I think there's lots of other issues happening inside D.C. that have sort of pushed Bitcoin and stablecoins and sort of those sorts of issues to the back burner. They got to get, the debt ceiling passed. But I think we're going to be heading into a political season in the next few months where getting Bitcoin onto the agenda is an important issue, and I think supporting Cynthia Lummis' efforts will be an important thing to do.
Jason, I want to turn to you. Bitcoin legislation stalled, introduced last June. Your take on what we're going to hear in this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's very critical that the conversation continue. Obviously, people here know that Bitcoin is probably the most important issue that we could be talking about. In Washington, they put it on the back burner. I think that it's critical for us to have incentivized Democratic politicians to engage in the conversation. I think Cynthia Lummis has done a good job of coordinating with Kristen Gillibrand in a bipartisan fashion, but there's too many Democrats who aren't really engaging in the conversation. So we're very positive about what we're going to see later today at the conference, and hopefully we can just incentivize by talking to the voters the politicians that actually need to start talking about this as solutions for everybody.
Well, that's word bipartisanship. Dan, want to throw it over to you. What's bringing people on the red and blue aisles together over this issue?
Yeah, I think this topic is incredibly important because whether you're too cool for it or not, bipartisanship matters. Narratives matter, stories matter to move this technology forward, at least in the short and medium term. And there's a lot of reasons, Jason, it's great that you're up here, that Bitcoin appeals to both the right, which we've been more accustomed to, but also the left. Just technological progress in general. We don't want to break our leg in the beginning of an incredibly important race towards innovation, and also just the broader financial inclusion implications of Bitcoin, which are inherently and naturally progressive. So I'm excited to hear Senator Lummis talk about Bitcoin bipartisanship, how we bring in both sides here, because I do think that that is key to winning the narrative war and winning hearts and minds for a technology that is paramount at this date and time.
Well, throwing it back to the main stage, of course, we're hear later from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who will be making his campaign debut here. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, on stage, an independent. Smash that like button on YouTube. Give us a rumble on Rumble. We're sending it back to the main stage now for Fireside Chat with Cynthia Lummis.
One of the beautiful things about the United States of America is that you can vote with your feet. Albeit not always easy, people have the ability to move and live in states that align with their values.
Politicians who support Bitcoin are on the rise, while anti-Bitcoin politicians who opt for a more totalitarian approach and take their policy lessons from China are in decline.
States that embrace Bitcoin, that embrace technology, and that are open to change are the ones that people are going to want to live in.
Our next Fireside Chat is States of Change, and a funny little story. Congressman Patrick McHenry was supposed to be here. We're sad that he was unable to join. Unfortunately, he is locked in a congressional session because they can't resolve the debt ceiling. So fiat problems, I guess. But luckily, we still have the one and only Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, a great advocate for Bitcoin. Woo! Yeah, we're going to give her a couple rounds of applause, I think. And this is going to be with moderator Perry Ann Boring, the founder of the Chamber of Digital Commerce.
Please give them a very warm welcome.
Senator Lummis, thank you so much for joining us for Bitcoin 2023, and also thank you for the incredible work you are doing to advance Bitcoin adoption in the United States. As you may know, Senator Lummis is champion #1 for our community in the U.S. Congress and in the U.S. Senate. And what you may not know about Cynthia Lummis is that she has spent her entire career advocating for the advancement of American values and American principles. Senator Lummis, you were at the age of...
Thank you.
Yes. At the age of 24 years old, you became the youngest woman elected into the Wyoming legislature, and you have dedicated your career to fighting for the people. And now you're fighting for Bitcoin. How does Bitcoin help us achieve the amazing principles of our country?
Well, thanks, Perry Ann, and thank you all for the warm welcome to Bitcoin 2023. I was raised on a ranch in Wyoming. We're the hay crew, the irrigating crew. We fixed all the fence and raised the cattle. I have 2 older sisters and a younger brother, and we were the ranch hands. And so we know how hard work and just taking on a project that you may not know how to complete and just seeing it through by learning by doing is part of the American way. We also learned how to pay our bills and to meet the obligations that we have to pay a ranch mortgage payment and pay for our cattle. So it comes natural to me to work with currencies that are designed for people who are fiscally responsible. And what we're seeing in the United States right now with regard to the dollar is that we're not very fiscally responsible with the US dollar. I'm actually worried as we go into another debt ceiling debate that we will eventually increase the debt ceiling to the point where our interest payments will exceed how much money we spend on national defense. So it is a national security issue that we're not responsible with the US dollar. So one of the things that's appealing about Bitcoin is it's not issued by a government. It's not tied to government largesse and expenditures. It is owned by individuals that have property rights to Bitcoin. It is mined, which is something that comes naturally to a girl from Wyoming. When I was practicing law, I represented mining companies and oil and gas companies. And so the concept of mining came naturally to me as well. So there's so many things about Bitcoin that are consistent with American values of freedom, property rights, personal responsibility, ownership, and so Bitcoin is something that is just so consistent with American values that we need to make sure it is protected, nurtured, and allowed to innovate here in the United States.
It's so important and it's so refreshing to hear that from you and from other people in Congress that are fighting for the advancement of this technology in the United States. And there's a lot going on in Washington right now. There's a lot of bills that have been introduced this Congress. In the previous Congress, there were 80 bills that were introduced related to digital assets, Bitcoin, and blockchain technology. Some of those bills will be reintroduced, some already have, and then there's some big ones in the work. Can you just give us an update on the state of play of what's going on in the legislative process for digital assets and Bitcoin in the Congress?
Well, last year, because of some very high-profile failures in the business, it was a real setback. Even though you all know that when FTX failed, they held 0 Bitcoin, there are a lot of people in Washington, D.C. that conflate companies with digital assets. They conflate Bitcoin with other cryptocurrencies. And so it's now time to unravel and unpack the differences, reacquaint members of Congress with the differences and how to properly regulate in the security space, so there's adequate consumer protection and disclosure, but to also, in the case of Bitcoin, which is clearly a commodity, put it in the same category in terms of legislative controls as other commodities, so Bitcoin can enjoy the benefits of being in the commodity space.
So let's talk about what's drill down into what's happening in the Senate. So in the previous Congress, you introduced with Senator Gillibrand the Responsible Financial Innovation Act, which was a comprehensive piece of legislation that covered a lot of bases in terms of digital asset policy and what regulatory oversight is going to look like for this space. It included everything from banking law to securities laws, the SEC's role, the CFTC's roles, IRS. As we look towards the reintroduction of this bill, which you're currently working on, what can we expect to see in the next version, in the next draft? What differences or what improvements, what can we expect to see?
Well, we will be reintroducing in the next several weeks, maybe as long as a month, the bill that Senator Gillibrand and I sponsored. It will probably be a comprehensive bill. What we filed last year was very comprehensive because we wanted people to understand what the whole regulatory framework would look like in one piece of legislation. Now, whether it will be broken apart and go to different committees to be considered is yet to be seen, but it is capable of being broken apart. Consequently, we're also working with the House, Patrick McHenry, Maxine Waters, and the Financial Services Committee in the House. What we're apt to see is for the House to move a stablecoin bill first. Then you'll probably see the introduction of Lummis-Gillibrand in the Senate, which will remain comprehensive. The Lummis-Gillibrand bill will look a little different in terms of the securities side, where we're throwing in a much more robust consumer protection effort and disclosure effort for anything that's considered a security. And that will be the main difference. I know that Patrick McHenry is working with Glenn Thompson, who is the chairman of the House Ag Committee. Commodities fall under the Ag Committee in both the House and the Senate. And so the piece that Bitcoiners will be most interested in seeing is what happens in the Ag Committee in both the House and the Senate. Now, every 5 years, there's a new Ag bill, but we don't expect the CFTC component to come along with the 5-year Farm Bill. We expect it to stand alone. Now, our committees in the Senate, and specifically Senator Gillibrand and I, are working through our staffs regularly, weekly, with the significant players in the House, both on the Ag Committee and the Financial Services Committee, to try to dovetail and work out behind the scenes a lot of the differences between the Lummis-Gillibrand concepts and what Patrick McHenry and Maxine Waters are working through the House, as well as Glenn Thompson, so we can iron out behind the scenes as many of the differences as possible before they pass one house or the other.
So just to clarify, you mentioned the stablecoin legislative efforts that are happening in House Financial Services. Are you waiting to reintroduce Lummis-Gillibrand until that's worked through the House?
We are not.
Okay.
We want to make sure that we have ironed out some of the issues with regard to shoring up the SEC component of regulation, in light of some of the things that happened last year, without over-regulating. And I want to go back and stress the importance of innovating with regard to blockchain technology and not inhibiting the U.S. ability to innovate in this space, because the United States has always been the leader in innovation. This is where the thought leaders are, and we want to make sure that their efforts are nurtured and not suppressed by law. And so we want to make an adequate amount of consumer protections and disclosure opportunities without inhibiting progress. In the stablecoin bill, for example, as I understand it, Representative Maxine Waters has put a Democrat bill on the table. Of course, McHenry has a bill as well. The main difference seems to be whether states will have the opportunity to regulate. I'm a firm believer in the dual banking system. There are national banks and there are state banks. In my state, because we have such a small population, community banks, state-regulated banks are preferred, and we want to preserve the opportunity of the dual banking system even as we move into the stablecoin space. We think that'll also be helpful when certain businesses access Wyoming's SPDI law and other opportunities to work with state regulators to tailor systems for custody and lending that are overseen by state regulators, so these opportunities to innovate can be tailored to the states involved. New York has a robust interest in innovating in this space as well. So it's kind of a natural fit for Senator Gillibrand and I, given our state's interest in regulating and in innovating, to work together on this. And the other significant factor about having Senator Gillibrand as a co-sponsor, she's on the Ag Committee, which is the CFTC, Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I'm on the Banking Committee that oversees the SEC. And so we have the opportunity to weigh in on both sides of the equation. And we see real thought leaders in the House also in key positions to thought lead and who are interested in moving forward on this subject. So you'll see Lummis Gillibrand here in about a month. In the Senate, you will see the House move, not only with stablecoin, but perhaps following it up with other
infrastructure bill.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, market
correct.
infrastructure. Yes. So you've mentioned kind of just giving us a comprehensive lay of the land. Maybe just to summarize, on the House side, the House Financial Services Committee and the House Ag Committee are the key players. Yes. You have a stablecoin bill that's working its way through House Financial Services. There's kind of two different versions being finessed at the moment. And then we have a larger market infrastructure bill that's being worked on between the House Ag and the House Financial Services Committee, which is really encouraging to see that level of collaboration across committee. And then on the Senate side, with Senators Lummis and Gillibrand, the reintroduction of their bill. So there is bipartisan and bicameral work underway. There's a significant amount of staff hours, industry hours being put into work on legislative proposals, and a lot of the right type of conversations are happening, and that just the sophistication of policymaking on Capitol Hill has increased dramatically just in the past couple of years, really since you took office, to be honest. I think you've increased the, given everybody a little bit of a push to pay attention and to understand how the technology works, and to make sure the United States has a legal framework that allows businesses to operate here. I wanted to turn to Bitcoin mining because we're at the Bitcoin conference, and Bitcoin doesn't work unless we have a robust mining industry and community that's securing the ledger. It doesn't work without that. So the Biden administration just recently has proposed to put a 30% tax on all Bitcoin mining activity. For those joining on the live stream, the audience is booing. I can also say at the Chamber of Digital Commerce, we represent a lot of Bitcoin mining companies. Our membership represents over 50% of the Bitcoin hash rate here in the United States of America. And we've heard from these companies, they are incredibly concerned. And they have said, Perry Ann, if this were to happen, we could not operate our business here. We wouldn't be able to do business in the United States. So what if this were to be implemented and Bitcoin mining companies can no longer operate in the United States? What implications or unintended consequences could that have for our nation's energy security?
Well, I want to start by saying that isn't going to happen.
Thank you.
That said, miners can mine anywhere. There is a significant Bitcoin mining operation in Norway that operates on hydroelectric power, which is very inexpensive. There are opportunities all over the world for Bitcoin mining to occur in jurisdictions that are friends, such as Norway, and jurisdictions that are foes. And it's absolutely important that the development of this technology, anything that is comes to be on the blockchain, as well as Bitcoin mining itself, to occur in the United States. And so it's not only a national security, but it's an energy security issue as well. Let me give you some examples. Wyoming is one of the biggest mining and oil and gas producing states in the country. We're also one of the biggest wind energy and solar producing states in the country. So we are an all of the above state in terms of energy production. But one of the advantages of Bitcoin mining is that when you drill an oil and gas well, and it is distant from other oil and gas wells, you vent the gas into the atmosphere until you can bring in a pipeline to hook it up, hook that well up, and then take the product away underground through a pipeline. Well, while that's being vented, you can pull a Bitcoin mining operation in a trailer, use the vented methane gas to mine for Bitcoin, and you are preventing that gas from being vented into the atmosphere. And that is happening in Wyoming right now. This is not a pipe dream.
Bitcoin is cleaning up the environment.
Bitcoin is cleaning up the environment. You know, the other thing that's happened in Texas, and Texas is their legislature is weighing some legislation that would not be supportive of this concept, but I hope they'll pass it, because Texas is I hope they will not pass what they're weighing, excuse me, because
we believe we have a blockade in the House, but the Senate has, the Texas Senate did pass a bill that would put an arbitrary cap on Bitcoin miners being able to participate in ERCOT's ancillary service programs. I'm probably throwing around a lot of acronyms, but this is the grid operator. And the ancillary services are like demand response. So it's the tools they have to stabilize and secure the grid during peak hours.
And Bitcoin can actually be advantageous to stabilizing a grid, because there can be efforts to mine Bitcoin when use is low, and then to scale back the mining that is occurring when demand in other areas is high, such as when the temperature hits 100 degrees and the air conditioners are on. So there are advantages to Bitcoin mining, both in terms of environmental benefits, such as not venting gases into the atmosphere, as well as stabilizing grids. And Wyoming users are looking at some of these opportunities in Wyoming as well, as there are unfriendly efforts towards hydrocarbon energy. We want to find ways to sequester that carbon in Wyoming. And so if we can produce it, use it to mine Bitcoin, and then capture the carbon and sequester it in the ground, all in Wyoming, then we have a vertically integrated system, and Bitcoin mining will be a part of it.
Thank you. So Bitcoin is helping advance energy security in the United States. You mentioned national security. So the way that I see it is that Bitcoin is what we are going to use to transact in the global digital economy. It's what we're going to use to engage in all sorts of transactions, whether it's monetary transactions or smart contracts, the exchange of different types of records, government transactions. Blockchain technology and Bitcoin are all going to be what the global economy runs on. So right now, we got a lot of political posturing happening in Washington. We're seeing 30% excise tax on Bitcoin mining. You're seeing attacks across the aisle, critics and skeptics of this technology. But what if we push all of this innovation overseas and this ecosystem isn't built here in the United States? What implications could that have for our national security?
One of the things that is holding back our ability in Congress to legislate in this area is the fear that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are being used for criminal activities. We've tried to educate members of Congress that companies like Chainalysis can actually solve crimes easier with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies than they can with US dollars. But there's still people that just don't believe that. If we push all this overseas, we are preventing some of our abilities to identify criminal activity, identify terrorist activity, and nip it in the bud. We're also tying too much of our economy to our sluggish, government-controlled bureaucracies. And so one of the great things about Bitcoin, it is tethered to people. It is trustless. You don't have to have a trusted third party. You can transact regardless of national boundaries. And when government controls everything, and we look at how people just don't trust the government anymore, they don't trust government officials, it creates an atmosphere that is unhealthy. And so Bitcoin is advantageous in that it allows individuals their own sovereignty to take control of their lives, their property, their family, and to implement and use and secure their own values as Americans.
I absolutely agree. So we've kind of summed this up here in that Bitcoin is a vehicle to advance American values and American principles, and it can align us across the aisles. It doesn't need to be a political or a partisan topic. This is a tool that can help us increase our energy security, increase our national security. This is about jobs, innovation. This is about technology advancement and ensuring that Americans have the right to these benefits and ensuring that's preserved for the next generation. Here in the United States, there are so many people that came to the Bitcoin conference this year. People are here from all across the world because they're inspired about this message of freedom and what Bitcoin can do for the individual. Just so for the people who are here, who want to help advance this technology, realistically, how can they participate in the political process? And I have to give you a shout out because just 2 months ago, you co-hosted the Chamber's Blockchain Education Day in Washington, D.C., and you helped us welcome over 150 people, just people from across the country that came to D.C., and they spent the day meeting with their elected representatives and sharing some educational information about what Bitcoin is and how blockchain technology is driving change in their local communities. So for the people who want to help be a part of this movement, what can they do? How can they be a part of the political process realistically?
Well, let me take you back to the last Congress and the infrastructure bill. You may recall that there was a definition of broker brought forward in that bill that included miners. Miners do not know who the customer of their mined product will be. And yet, this definition of broker under the Internal Revenue Code would have required them to report who their customer would be. Bitcoin miners all over the country recognized that that was a complete disconnect between government understanding of Bitcoin mining and hardware and what really happens. And so we asked you to energize and to contact your members of the US Senate and Congress, and you did. You did in droves. And they had no idea how many people know about, use, mine, custody, and have individual wallets in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies until they were flooded with phone calls. And then everybody was paying attention. That's how you get the attention of Congress, when the phone rings, when their constituents from their district or their state are calling and saying, this is important to me. So I encourage you to do it. Your voices are powerful. And Perry Ann and her efforts to organize those voices is important too. So participate in groups that are advocates for your view of how Bitcoin fits into the US economy, and call your senators and call your representatives. It is worth your time.
Thank you. I know I used to work on Capitol Hill, and I was the person that used to answer the phones and take those phone calls and also receive all the correspondence, because a lot of emails and letters also come into congressional offices. And there's teams of people that work for members like Cynthia Lummis and others whose whole job is to understand what their constituents are saying, and that advises their policy position. So there really is a place for the people to participate in the political process, but sometimes it can just get discouraging because does it go anywhere? Well, the way that we as a community can be effective is to be organized and to be speaking in somewhat of a unified voice, or at least in an organized way. And that is something that we do achieve to do at the Chamber of Digital Commerce. And if you want to be a part of helping us, we will let you know when there are real threats happening in Washington. We will alert you when the time is right and how you can help us by calling your representatives and make sure they're hearing from us, they're hearing from the people, they're hearing from the users of the technology about how this is going to trample their rights and trample their ability to interact in a way that's commensurate with freedom and other values that we share in the United States. Senator Lummis, we thank you so much for your leadership. You have made such a difference to our community.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Are we done?
Welcome back. I'm Pete Rizzo, editor of Bitcoin Magazine. We're here again at the Bitcoin Magazine live desk presented by Marathon, joined again by special guests Chris Alamo, co-host of Bitcoin Magazine Live, Jason Mayer, author of Progressive's Case for Bitcoin, and Dan, host of Blue Collar Bitcoin podcast. We just heard a fireside chat with Cynthia Lummis, U.S. Senator from Wyoming, ringing the alarm here about U.S. President Joe Biden's proposed 30% tax on Bitcoin mining, talking about the reintroduction of laws in the legislature to make sure Bitcoin can continue operating. Why is this a bipartisan concern? I'm going to throw it over to you, Jason.
Yeah, I think one of the things I liked hearing from Senator Lummis was that this is a bipartisan, bicameral conversation that's happening. It's happening at both the state and federal level. And obviously, we know that the tax that's being proposed by the Biden administration is just sort of first-level thinking. It doesn't actually help the climate because the miners go somewhere else. That somewhere else is probably dirtier than they are mining in the U.S. And Bitcoin has a lot of innovation and ability to help the grid and help the environment here, and we'll be losing that.
Dan, your take?
Yeah, so totally agree there. I mean, I think Bitcoin represents a lot of decarbonizing incentives that we're in desperate need of. But I think it's also important that we zoom out and broaden and ask ourselves the question, how willing are we, and this is what Cynthia is asking, to have a draconian autocratic future of government overreach where they're literally regulating what energy can be used for. So I think, yes, Bitcoin's a consumer of energy, and its energy consumption is a good thing, and I think good for renewables and decarbonization. But to zoom out even that one step further to ask, what do we want the future to look like? Christmas lights, hot tubs, the cloud, Netflix, these are all things that use energy. Bitcoin also uses energy. And do we want to live in that future where that sort of thing is regulated by elected policymakers? I think not, and I think both sides, back to the bipartisanship, can agree that that is a future we don't want to live in.
Well, Senator's own words, Bitcoin is cleaning up the environment. Chris, your take?
Yeah, no, I think she's exactly right that it's cleaning up the environment. It's helping the environment. To Dan and Jason's points, that we do not want to bastardize energy use cases. We do not want to say energy is better used in certain cases. So this is not a path that we want to go down.
Interesting. Another backstage conversation we had is speaking about bipartisanship, we have seen some in the Democratic Party lean more crypto than Bitcoin. Jason, want to get your take. How do we reverse that?
Yeah, I wrote a book to try to help people think Bitcoin, not crypto. I'll say it into the camera. And I think that the more voters that we can get to read, to really understand that is the key, and just incentivize those politicians to listen to that. This is a technology that can help, and don't be distracted by those other things.
Of course, some of those issues complex, SEC, CFTC, ground turf wars. Dan, your take, how do we make this bipartisan?
Yeah, I mean, whether you like it or not, regulatory clarity is important. And I think both sides, because there is a lot of gray here. Now, the wonderful thing is we have Bitcoin labeled as commodity, but there's a lot of big money players sitting on the sidelines waiting for clarity. That's a conversation we need to have. Even if you want to live outside that paradigm, we don't. That's the world we live in. That's how financial markets work. And I think people on both sides of the aisle, once again, are working towards getting that clarity. Good thing for Bitcoin, this is an asset that we have some clarity on, and that's the commodity label.
Next up, Decentralization in Action, a keynote by Amity Uttarwar, a Bitcoin Core developer. We'll send it back to the main stage.
Hello again. So, the whole point of decentralization is that there is no single point of failure, no single point of control, no single throat to choke.
But decentralization can be messy. Yet somehow, Bitcoin nodes all over the world reach consensus every 10 minutes.
Here to tell us what decentralization in action looks like is Bitcoin Core developer Amity Uttarwar.
Please give Amity a very warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. My name's Amity, and I'm here to talk to you about decentralization in action. So a little bit about me. I am a Bitcoin Core contributor, which means I write code for the open source client that lets people all over the world run Bitcoin. I was the first female contributor, and I focus on the peer-to-peer network. My contributions have landed me on Forbes 30 Under 30, CoinDesk Most Influential, and I'm generally around the space in articles, podcasts, etc. But enough about me. Let's get to the good stuff. So, quick raise of hands. Who here is familiar with this concept of decentralization? Oh yeah, thank you for indulging me. This was just a quick participation check because I'd be impressed if you made it around a Bitcoin conference without grappling with this concept. And the word seems to contain it all. You take something centralized, and then you don't do that. How complicated could it be? So let's hit that magic decentralization button, and you might get something that looks like this. This is a representation of computers around the world running Bitcoin software. And it looks pretty good, right? Messages are being passed through one another. There's a network that spans the entire world. That's pretty cool. But if you take a closer look at this image, you can see that if something happens to this node over here, well, then you've just kind of stranded Australia. And let's say this connection gets taken down. Now the hemispheres are split. One more node, we can split up the Americas, and boom, we have 4 separate networks going on. In ordinary software projects, we have a lot of ways to handle this. For example, just take some downtime until you can repair the connection. But in Bitcoin, first off, we don't take downtime. But more importantly, this is what we use decentralization for. We use it to avoid single points of failure. And that's really important because Bitcoin is a global money. And in order to achieve that, it needs to be censorship resistant, which means no entity should be able to prevent another entity from participating. Whether that's inadvertent, your node accidentally goes down and now you've cut off your friends, or if it's malicious, it's really important for us to be able to build this truly global money for there to not have that single point of failure. And so decentralization is really a tool to achieve this end. So we might have a network graph that looks something like this, which is going to be a lot more resilient. The main thing I'd like to point out here is that there's a lot more connections. So each node has to do more work. They have to send more messages and validate more information, and in order to build that redundancy, which is something I'm going to call strong decentralization. So this is the kind of problem that I look at on a daily basis within the context of the code. A node on the Bitcoin network has to answer questions like, who should I connect to? How do I know if they're being malicious or honest? Am I revealing private information? But how do I make sure my transactions get to the network without revealing that they are mine? And these are really hard problems. But for the most part, they're achievable. And the main reason for this is because computers can handle scale really well. This is a video that's showing blocks being propagated to nodes all around the world. And it's kind of incredible that a whole block worth of information can make it to computers across the entire planet in less than 5 seconds. A quick note is that this is a video from 2020, and so I hope that the geographic distribution that we see today would be a little bit different. But that just goes to show there are many, many ways in which we need to continue working on decentralizing. So solving the double spend problem in a decentralized way was the core innovation of the Bitcoin white paper. From day one that Satoshi released the client and the white paper, there was this innovative solution of how mining or the leader election could be done at random in a way that rotated, and how nodes for themselves could verify all of that information and say, okay, who has how much money, and can I validate that myself? But building Bitcoin in a decentralized way, well, that's still an ongoing problem. And it's a really, really hard one. It's challenging enough to get tens of thousands of nodes to agree on what happened when, but it's arguably even more difficult to get thousands or hundreds of thousands of people to agree on what should we do next, or how should we do it. And it can be kind of overwhelming. the vast majority of social systems that we see in this day and age are extremely centralized for this reason. Because as you saw with that strong decentralization model, there's a lot of redundancy, and it can be perceived as waste when you're using decentralization. Imagine trying to get a group of 10 people to agree to something, and then scale that to 100, and then 1,000, and 100,000. It feels impossible. Do you think you can get 100,000 people to agree to absolutely anything? And so, on the question of how we can do that, we can look to models around the world to give us some inspiration. So we'll start with ants. Ants have a really interesting way of discovering food. When they're first scouting for food, they'll take a random pattern, go in different directions. And when they find a tasty morsel, they'll take the most direct path back to their home base and release pheromones that are proportional to the size of feast that they have discovered. And so then, with that signal of scent, other ants will converge and go to that same feast, make the same route back, and eventually they can form this neat little line that might be leading straight to the leftovers you forgot about. It's quite an incredible idea that the signals of the individual can influence the collective as a whole to organize so neatly. Bees offer another example of consensus through the individuals. Every year, they need to find a new place to live. They can't break up the clan because there's only one queen. And so they also can't have one person go scout all of the locations. And so they use decentralized consensus. The way it works is they send out their scouts, they find viable places to live, and then they come back and they do what's called a waggle dance to demonstrate how appropriate the new place that they found is to live. And it's pretty funny because if there's any contention, they literally have a dance-off and will be trying to garner agreement within the collective by the size of their actions demonstrating how appropriate this new place would be for them to live. So this way, they are able to eventually resolve their conflict and use this decentralized consensus machine to decide where should we move to. But it's not just animals. Although the vast majority of our social systems, whether it's government, money, schools, banks, internet, blah, 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 are centralized, we do have some models we can look to in our human collective that are decentralized and very effective. Specifically, I'm talking about language. So here I have some words, some of which have come into our collective knowledge through internet and meme culture, and others which are deemed words by Webster's dictionary. Let me take a shot at which ones you'd understand if I were to use in casual conversation. And let me focus on the HODL example. It started with one person on one forum writing one message, and now has become a word that you probably are all familiar with and has propagated through our entire community. It's quite incredible how the actions of an individual can impact the whole, and that's the entire idea of decentralization. So coming back to the question of how do we make Bitcoin better? If you believe in decentralization, that means that you believe your participation matters. The signals that you send out as an individual have the ability to influence the whole collective. So now I'm going to do a real poll. Who here runs a full node? Yeah, that's awesome. Who here uses Bitcoin on a non-custodial wallet? All right, nice. And who here is on Bitcoin Twitter? Okay, cool. So if you believe that your participation matters, the next question is, how do you participate well? And this is not, oops, I'm sorry. Okay, and there's some good advice for that. One is, don't trust, verify. You might have heard this concept, and it's really important. At the node level on the network, they need to validate each transaction to make sure that they hold the ledger. They have to verify the blocks. And that's the way that the system is able to operate. this works at a human level too, because if you trust someone else to hold your private keys, then if they do something with it, you might not actually have access to Bitcoin on the blockchain. However, on the other hand, 100% trustlessness is impossible. You can't audit every single piece of hardware and software that it requires to run a singular node, let alone all of the other layers of community that is required in order for Bitcoin to succeed in our human world. And so we have to hold these things and decide, how do I spend my time at an individual level? And there are so many options. This is just a small snippet of things that you could do to participate in the community. And this doesn't even represent the whole realm of options. So I think what it really comes down to is intentionality. You have to be intentional about what you consume and what you create. Because what you consume is the equivalent of a node validating transactions on the blockchain. That's how you absorb the material of where the community is at, what is the truth of the current state of affairs, and what is that shared state. But you also have to make sure to create and not get stuck in that consumption mode, because that's the equivalent of mining a block or broadcasting a transaction. That's what makes money move on the Bitcoin blockchain, but that's also what makes our social system move on the human level. So if there's one thing that you can take away from this talk, it's this. If you believe in decentralization, then your actions matter. Think skeptically and build things. Whether that's a conversation with people you care about at dinner, or it's educational material or writing code, find what works for you and go hard at it. Thank you very much. If you're interested in more visual, fun material that covers technical concepts, then we're launching this project called the Bitcoin Bytes. You can sign up for our mailing list at this website or find us on Twitter. Also, those of you who are able to find me, we have some cute little physical zines. This one's explaining Taproot at a high level. So I'll be distributing those over the course of this conference. And if you're interested in getting a hold of me, this is my email, or you can find me on Twitter. Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Pete Rizzo, editor of Bitcoin Magazine. We're here at the Bitcoin Magazine live desk presented by Marathon at Bitcoin 2023, joined by a new round of special guests. To my left, Amanda Cavallari, chair of the Bitcoin Today Coalition. To her left, Marty Bent, host of the Truth for the Commoner podcasts, and last but not least, joining Shactel, independent investigative journalist. We just heard from Amity Uttarwar, a Bitcoin core developer, talking about decentralization in a technical manner. I want to bring that back for the viewers at home and talk about how decentralization relates to the collapse in trust that we're seeing, especially as we hear from more political figures later. Amanda.
I think for our entire lives, for millennia, these power entities have become more and more centralized. So there's fewer and fewer people at the top making these decisions. And I think now that we have a distribution of information and money, that is changing. And we're seeing these grassroots, ground level up things through tools like Bitcoin.
A change from top down to bottom up. Maybe, Marty, your take.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin provides us with that tool that allows us to not have to trust the centralized authorities. I mean, that's what Bitcoin said. Not Bitcoin said, what Satoshi said on the mailing list many times. Banks can't be trusted. Trusted third parties will continually corrupt the systems they control. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, as Meaty explained. The distribution of the node topography, hash rate, makes it so no individual or small group of individuals can control Bitcoin. That's very powerful.
Jordan, your take, an investigative journalist, maybe here a bit skeptically, your second conference. What is your take on this centralization dynamic and Bitcoin's role?
Yeah, it's fascinating because I was just this morning writing about the Bilderberg Conference, which is the meeting of the elite of the elites, these 150 people that are basically some of the most powerful people in the world who all believe in this globalist centralized ideology. And to see that in contrast with the Bitcoin conference is pretty unbelievable. You have a lot of people here who just believe in freedom and that Bitcoin is basically the best tool to defend their freedoms, both for Americans that are here and everyone globally. It's an incredible grassroots movement for sure.
Well, Bitcoin and freedom, a hot topic. We heard presumptive Republican hopeful Ron DeSantis recently come out against a central bank digital currency. Let's talk about the dynamic of the federal government trying to exercise more authority. Maybe a digital dollar coming. Marty, Amanda, your take?
That would be a slave coin that I don't want, that nobody would want. They'd be able to track you, tell you where you can spend, what you can spend on. And the bubbling theme and trend of governments talking about CBDCs signals to me that they're worried they're losing control of the current monetary system and the financial system, and they need to trust the CBDC to maintain that control, and that's why it's extremely important that Bitcoin succeeds.
Amanda, your take. What can we do about this digital dollar coming?
I think what we can do is push back at a state level right now, so that's huge, right, what Florida's just done. We look at also these examples of what's going on with China. There's massive debt around the world. China's got a lot of, folks that owe them money. So I think we'll see this turn of okay, a lot of folks where they have helped build ports and things, we'll forgive your debt, use our digital yuan, right? So I think we're going to see that trend grow and grow, especially in Africa and in South America.
Some insidious tactics. Jordan, CBDCs versus the digital dollar versus Bitcoin?
Yeah, I'm encouraged by the politicians who are standing up for our rights, whether that's Ron DeSantis in the free state of Florida. I think one of the reasons why we have the Bitcoin conference here is because other states basically wouldn't allow it.
Yeah, and during the pandemic, fun fact.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting to see that there's this new kind of political divide in the United States. You have statists versus freedom advocates. So, we have a Democrat, RFK Jr. here. We have Tulsi Gabbard here. We have Cynthia Lummis here. It's very interesting to see this new coalition arise.
We'll be hearing more on the main stage today from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. making his campaign debut and Tulsi Gabbard in a bit. For now, like our content on Twitter. Smash that like button. We'll be right back after the short break, sending it to the main stage.
Fiat economists are so impressive.
It's true. It's one of the only professions in the world where you can be completely wrong about absolutely everything all the time And it doesn't matter. There are no consequences.
Well, that and politics.
That's true. And in both cases, they might just give you a Nobel Prize, huh?
But our next keynote speaker takes a different approach to economics, relying on crazy concepts like logic, reason, and historical context to explain the present system and the future to come.
Author of The Bitcoin Standard, The Fiat Standard, and his new book, Principles of Economics, please welcome stainless steel pan enthusiast, Seyfeddin Ammous.
Let's give him a warm welcome.
I forgot the clicker, so I hope somebody can click through the slides while I am here. I'm sorry about that. Thank you so much for hosting me. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for everybody who's read my books. It is your support of my work that has made this new book possible. My new book is Principles of Economics. It's a textbook in economics. I hope the people in backstage can scroll through the slide. Yes. So Bitcoin is more than just a technology for sending and receiving money. Bitcoin overturns the current order of society based on central banks' unlimited power. I think this is something that people in this conference should probably be familiar with. A lot of our life, a lot of our world depends on the fact that there's a small group of people, mainly governments and banks, that can print money out of nothing, out of thin air, while the rest of us have to work for it like slaves. Well, what would be the impact on society if we moved away from this kind of world into a world in which everybody had to equally work for their money? Well, obviously I discuss those impacts a lot in my books, but I think one thing that is underrated perhaps is the impact that it would have on education, and in particular economics education. So because of Bitcoin, we no longer need the fiat, thank you so much. Because of Bitcoin, we no longer need the fiat cartel in order to have money. We also no longer need the fiat cartel to sponsor economists in order to teach us economics. If you look at the current world of academic economics, this is a scientific chart illustrating the relationship between modern economists and the central bank. You see around 90% of papers in monetary economics are sponsored by the Federal Reserve. Around 99%, by my estimation, of academic economists believe that you need a cartel in charge of money in order for money to work. I think this is going to go down in history as one of the dumbest things people in the 20th and 21st century believed. Is this idea that money is a technology that can only work if some group of people can make it out of thin air and get to decide the supply and get to decide who gets to use it while everybody else has to work for it like a peon. Well, these people get to decide what gets taught as economics at universities. If you had the misfortune of learning economics at a university, you learned it from people who think we need a monopoly cartel. You know, in the same book in which they taught you that a cartel for oil is bad, a cartel for food is bad, a monopoly on housing or any other economic good is bad, they told you that the only way that money can work is by having a monopoly. And why is that the case? Well, simply because if you don't agree, you don't get to call yourself an economist. You don't get to get a job as an economist. You don't get hired at a university if you tell them, I think we should just get rid of the Federal Reserve and replace it with nothing. It doesn't work that way. Yes, nothing. Nothing is the best replacement. So, writing the Bitcoin Standard, thankfully, finally allowed me independence from academic economics. And I was able to build my own readership. Thanks to Bitcoiners, thanks to people who buy my books, I'm able to write what was for a lot of the last 5 years, if you looked at the Amazon bestseller section, in the money and monetary economics section, the Bitcoin Standard was always close to the top throughout the last 5 years since it came out. And that happened independently of academic institutions. I think this is something unique and it's something that's very important. And it's not something that would have been possible without Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. Because Bitcoin opens your eyes up to the fact that we don't need government to run money, you become open to the idea that maybe we can also read perspectives on money that don't come from government. I apologize for my voice. So because of this, I'm able to write a book that can sell very well, and it can outsell most of the fiat cartel economists' books on monetary economics. And because of that, I thought this would be a great opportunity to take to write an economic textbook that is independent of the influence of academia. So I left my job at a university, and I've spent the last 4 years working hard on trying to make this textbook that I'd wanted to make for more than 10 years now, but I could not do while I was in academia, because in academia I would have spent 4 years writing this book, and without Bitcoin, without Bitcoiners, it would not have gotten assigned into any university, it would not have gotten any kind of readership. But now, thanks to you guys, I'm able to do this. So, what would, thank you. So, what would a proper non-fiat textbook for economics look like? What would an economics textbook look like if it wasn't financed by the fiat cartel to justify their use of central banking to rob the planet? And I mean, that's basically, you know, if you haven't read your university textbook yet, that's, sorry for spoiling it for you, but that's the conclusion of the book. There's a whole bunch of math and a whole bunch of equations and a whole bunch of noises, but then you come up with the conclusion that, oh yeah, we need the cartel, we need a small group of people in charge of money, we need them to print money, and we need to stop anybody else from having a free market in money and banking, because otherwise, how will they get to rob the planet? So, what would a textbook look like if it didn't have those things? Wouldn't it be nice if economics was taught as a field of knowledge and not just marketing for the fiat cartel? That was the goal from writing this textbook. Obviously, it was influenced a lot by Austrian economics, and so this is what you can expect in the book. It begins by discussing the fundamentals of the methodology of approaching economics and thinking about economics questions. It looks at the acts that people do to economize, tries to explain the market order, explains monetary economics, and then explains the importance of economics and capital accumulation and economic freedom for civilization. And so I'm going to just give you a brief overview of the material for the book. In the first section of the book, in fundamentals, as I said, we begin with an Austrian perspective, and so this is grounded in human action. It's not a study of aggregates. We don't look at scientific sounding relationships between economic aggregates that are made up by economic statisticians. We actually look at how human beings act, and we try and understand the implications of humans' actions and the economic underpinnings of these economic actions. We explain the concept of value, and the fundamental difference between Austrian economics and mainstream fiat economics is the concept of value. For Austrian economists, value is subjective. It's not something that can be decreed. It's not something that can be measured with scientific precision. It's not something that's objective. There are no goods that have objective value. The concept of objective value is invalid in Austrian economics. Value is always subjective. It is in the mind of the person who makes that valuation. And this is an enormously important concept which changes the entire way in which you approach economics. And it is the reason why most of the economics you learned at university practically serves no useful purpose other than to get you to believe in central banking and the fiat cartel. And then the third chapter discusses the concept of time and the importance of time to economics. So with that fundamental analysis, we move on to the concept of economizing. What does it mean to economize? And since time is scarce, all of our actions are about economizing our time. And so the actions that people carry out to economize, these are concepts in economics that you've heard over and over again, but they don't get explained very well, I would say, in your university textbook. So I go through the concept of labor, what does it mean, the concept of property and the importance of property. And that is, of course, something that your textbook does not emphasize. And of course, your textbook has very little to discuss about the concept of capital and the importance of capital accumulation, for obvious reason, because they don't want you to have capital, they want to keep all the capital for themselves. But in this book, we go through the concept of capital and why it is such a pivotal concept and why it is so important to understand it in modern economics. And then we discuss the economics of technology and the economics of energy and power, and why all of these concepts are the way in which we economize to try and make our time better on this earth, to increase the quality and the quantity of time on this earth, which is how I can like to think of the concept of economizing. Then moving on from these individual acts that people carry out to economize, We have the market order, which corresponds to the things that people do in a social setting to economize and to trade with one another. And then first, the most obvious one is trade, where people trade with one another. And then because we live in a system in which we trade, we are able to develop money. We're able to develop the concept of money, and that is an enormously important concept for human society. And that, of course, is a concept that's shrouded with a lot of mystery in your economics textbook, but I hope that my book helps clarify these concepts. Based on that, we move on to the concept of the market economy. What is a market economy, how it functions, and why it must be based in a concept of private property in order for the market economy to function. And then finally explaining the much maligned concept of capitalism. What is capitalism? Why is it so important for people to be able to accumulate capital? And really, the conclusion of this chapter, what I try to argue is that without the freedom to accumulate capital, human civilization itself is impossible. And the danger of the destruction of capitalism is not just, we won't have nicer toys and we won't have a faster iPhone or we won't have a nicer gimmicks. It's going to take away our ability to live as a civilized society. And that brings us to the finest, to the topic of money and monetary economics. And from the Austrian perspective, we begin the topic of money from understanding time preference. Time preference is the key towards understanding money, and it helps us understand credit, it helps us understand banking. It is the concept that at the heart of interest rates. And then in the 15th chapter, we discuss the expansion of money supply. That's a topic that I believe Bitcoiners will find very useful. The increase of the money supply, I argue, is at the root of so much of the world's problems. And it is the reason why governments have so much power. It's the reason why people cannot save. And in this book, I go in depth into the problems of monetary expansion, why it is such a big deal, and why I argue the destruction of money as a free market institution and its replacement with government loyalty points, essentially, is undermining the entire fabric of civilization, which is the topic of the final section of the book, civilization. And here, a lot of people think economics has nothing to say about politics. Economics is subservient to politics, that political considerations are more important than economic considerations. But I make the case for why actually all economic and political action can be studied from the perspective of economics, because ultimately all of these are economic decisions. People like to present defense and violence as if they are these unique things for which economic activity doesn't count. But I make the case for why defense is just another market good, and it is a market good that is provided on the market. In fact, if you look around you, you see that in the world today we have far more private security officers than police officers. If you want security, you just buy it on the market. You buy your own gun, you secure yourself, or you hire people to work for you in security. And primarily the main role for governments in terms of security is to secure governments, not to secure you. And I think this economic way of understanding it helps you get to the reality of economics and the reality of the world much better. And finally, in chapter 18, I make the case for why capitalism is essential for civilization. And I end on a positive note, which is that, if you look around, you see all of those concepts that I discussed for economizing, they are all being undermined by fiat money, by governments, by totalitarianism all over the world. And it's easy to lose hope. But ultimately, human civilization has always faced enemies and it's always faced threats. And the capitalists, the people who are willing to accept the concept of private property and accumulate capital, have always found a way to win, simply because the enemies of capitalism have no capital. They destroy their capital. Essentially, the only way that you can be consistent about being anti-capital, the only way that you can consistently and honestly and non-hypocritically fight capitalism would be by not accumulating capital, in which case the most effective weapon you will have is slinging your own feces. And that makes you a relatively easy opponent to deal with for anybody who wants to accumulate capital. Because people who accumulate capital, people who accept innovation, people who accept property rights, develop tools to deal with animals and barbarians and governments that want to take away their ability to live in peace and in civilization. And I believe the tool that we have found to fight the latest kind of animals that are threatening our civilization is Bitcoin, because it is what's going to strengthen us against the enemies of capitalism and human freedom. Thank you so much. Thanks. Cheers.
Welcome back. I'm Pete Rizzo, editor at Bitcoin Magazine. We're here at the Bitcoin Magazine Live Desk presented by Marathon, joined again by special guests Amanda Cavalieri, chair of the Bitcoin Today Coalition, Marty Bent, host of the Truth for the Commoner podcast, and Jordan Schachtel, independent investigative journalist. We just heard from Saifuddin Ammous, gave a rousing speech on how government money corrupts. So I want to send it to the panel. We're going to hear from presidential candidates later. Can they fix the money printer? Marty.
No, they cannot. The inertia of the centralized system is too strong. The momentum is too strong. As Friedrich Hayek said, the only way we can take back control of the money is to find a sly roundabout way to take it out of the hands of the government. And that is Bitcoin.
It sounds like you're going to be skeptical of these candidates later.
I mean, I think some of them are very nice people. They're very nice people. I just don't think there's anything they can do to change the system. Jordan and I were talking. They will not be let in if they can. And even if they do get in, it'll be made impossible for them to do anything.
Government money printer ruining academia, ruining science. Jordan, your take, can we fix this?
The solutions will not be found in Washington, D.C. I agree with Marty. The solutions will be found in places like this, where you have brilliant engineers, coders, developers, entrepreneurs, who are developing solutions to make it easier for people to adopt Bitcoin, to buy Bitcoin, to use Bitcoin. And as much as I appreciate that some of these presidential candidates, Congress members, that they are starting to discuss Bitcoin a little more, I think that certainly DC is not the answer. DC is always where the problem lies. DC is where they can print the money and debase your wealth and make you poor and have fun staying poor forever through their fiat system. So I think that I'm very encouraged by the solutions that we find outside of DC. I mean, right behind us we have the great Mises Institute booth, and they're based in Alabama. So any institution that's basically connected to that uniparty, beltway, blob situation is not good for me.
All right, well, unfortunately, we have to send it back to the main stage. Flow States and Free Markets. Next up, a keynote with Mr. Robert Breedlove. Stay tuned.
All right, to warm you up for this next one, we're going to do a little activity. So raise your hand if Bitcoin is your preferred way of saving money.
All right.
Okay.
Raise your hand if you denominate your wealth in Bitcoin.
Raise your hand if you've ever spent Bitcoin on goods or services or zapped Bitcoin on Nostr to give value for value.
All right, that's a lot of hands. So I guess when someone asks the question, what is money, it's safe to say Bitcoin is money.
I'm sorry, Robert Breedlove, you might need a new title for your podcast now. No, I'm just kidding. Up next, we have Robert Breedlove, host of the What is Money show with Flow States and Free Markets.
Let's give him a warm welcome.
Good morning. So, in preparing for this keynote, we went through a lot of heady topics. We talked about the meaning of meaning. We talked about fractal reflections of ego. We talked about the nature of human virtue. But it soon became apparent to us in preparing for this keynote that a lot of this was more suitable for an essay than a 15-minute talk. So I'm going to focus my talk today on relatively lightweight questions, attempting to answer things such as, what is the meaning of life? And as it turns out, meaning has a lot to do with the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves and the pursuit of virtue in general. As Plato said, those who tell the stories rule society. If society is a story, then with the power of a fiat money printer, that story is largely authored by a powerful minority of central planners. Many of us here are here because we dream of a new and better story, one authored by sovereign individuals and for the benefit of humanity, where individuals author their own destiny instead of having their roles written by central planners and a state that is antagonistic to their wants, desires, and dreams. There are two major experiences in my life that have been very transformative. One was my discovery of Bitcoin. The other was becoming a father to my beautiful daughter, Penny. And if society is a story, through Bitcoin, I discovered how ugly the current storyline is. And by being a father to my beautiful daughter, I discovered how excellent it could and should be. As individuals, Bitcoin showed me that we're each a node on the network with a unique yet equal responsibility to be the change we wish to see in the world. My daughter taught me that responsibility is not an intellectual abstraction, but a set of specific actions that must be fulfilled each and every day. These thoughts are a powerful reminder that I'm shaping a story that my daughter Penny will one day inherit, and that I have a responsibility, even if just a small part, to make a positive difference in this world. And when I look on the world today, I see a fiat fairy tale that's quickly devolving into a nightmare. Instead of kids living this, they get this. Instead of this, they get this. And instead of this, they get this. It's a story of division and fragmentation, not just between people, but within people. And as an aspiring sovereign individual, I'm not here to play any blame games, but I think we can all identify the source of this cultural fragmentation. Fractured money leads to fractured hearts, leads to fractured minds, leads to fractured societies. The new story we write under a Bitcoin standard should be where kids feel valuable and valued, instead of lost, broken, and isolated. But where can we start? One important place to look is the condition that describes the optimal human experience, known as the flow state. Flow was popularized by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, but it's a phenomenon that has been studied by great philosophers like William James and Nietzsche. Flow describes the optimal state of consciousness, where our skills are pushed to their limits, where we feel and perform our best, where we lose track of time and self-identity. Meditators call it nirvana, athletes call it the zone, and performers simply call it peak performance. We experience flow when we focus deeply on a difficult task, which is properly mapped to our present skill level. Flow occurs when our awareness, is totally absorbed by our actions. Another deep thinker on flow states is Stephen Kotler, who says, "Flow is more than an optimal state of consciousness, one where we feel and perform our best. It also appears to be the only practical answer to the question, what is the meaning of life? Flow is what makes life worth living." Kotler outlines the key properties of flow experience, and as a sovereign individual, as a father, and as a freedom maximalist, these properties offer very interesting insights. These are the 5 progressive properties of flow. First is curiosity. A curious mind desires to learn more, and this can lead to the discovery of passion, a powerful emotional drive that transforms curiosity into a purpose. Purpose is an intentional aim or calling which encourages an individual to pursue autonomy. Autonomy is a state of self-determination and independence that forges self-mastery, which is the possession of valuable skills, virtue, and the status of self-authorship. Looking at this list, 3 things jump out to me. First is that all these properties practically define what it means to be a sovereign individual. Self-mastery is a synonym for self-sovereignty. to be the master of one's own body, one's own mind, one's own emotions, one's own actions, one's own property. Secondly, each of these properties are characteristics that any loving parent would want their child to experience and possess, from natural curiosity to hard-earned self-mastery. It is also, and not by coincidence, the exact qualities that central planners do not want in their populations. Curious people don't trust the experts, and self-mastered people won't tolerate a big brother which violates their privacy or their property. Third, and of deep significance to the very basis of capitalism itself, every good and every service that has ever existed and succeeded in the market, or will ever exist for that matter, is generated by this process. This process is the process of creation itself. Flow states, both in experience and in their results, are the foundation of everything we hold dear as sovereign individuals, as parents, and as freedom maximalists. The story of sovereign individuality could be described as the pursuit of flow. The sovereign individual is a curious, passionate, purpose-driven, autonomous individual mastering himself through acts of creation. And in this way, flow and Bitcoin are a match made in heaven. If flow produces self-mastery, which is the perfect means for creating value in the world, Bitcoin is what secures our property, which is the perfect means for preserving value. So we must ask ourselves, if flow is such a profound state for individuals, why is it an exception rather than the rule? It is noteworthy that children have no problem entering flow. They do it naturally when they're allowed to play freely. It is only as we condition children through education that they lose that talent. The state institutions we entrust to nurture our children's curiosities and passions seemingly do the opposite. This is, of course, by design. This is the argument made by John Taylor Gatto, an American educator, in his books, Weapons of Mass Instruction and Dumbing Us Down, the Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling. Titles that in themselves tell a grim story about the Western educational system.